Welcome back to Mystery Con. Tonight's conspiracy theory is chilling and it just might give you goosebumps. This isn't about aliens in the sky or cryptic symbols in the shadows. This is about something far quieter and far more real. Power that doesn't need to be seen because it's woven into everything. Behind every spotlight is a shadow. This isn't a story of men in dark rooms making secret decisions. It's about families who never left the room at all. For over 2 centuries, 13 elite bloodlines have shaped the course of global history. Not through force, but through structure. They don't run governments, they finance them. They don't control your vote, they control what shapes it. From the banks that issue your money, to the media that filters your reality, to the crises that conveniently rewrite your freedoms. This is not fiction, this is legacy. And tonight, we pull back the curtain one system at a time. What you're about to hear isn't theory, it's the blueprint of power, hidden in plain sight. Like, subscribe, hit the bell, because once we dive deeper, you'll want to know what's coming next. There's no need for meetings when the bloodlines remember. They always say the algorithm made the decision. But I was the one who signed the final report. The office was quiet the morning it happened, naturally so. No startup buzz, no espresso hum, just the smooth churn of optimization. That was my world. Efficiency reports, ethics memos, redundancy matrices. We called it ethical streamlining. A neat euphemism for layoffs that looked good in board minutes. My job was to approve the kill switches, tidy the moral loose ends, make it all look like progress, and I was good at it. Good enough that when the latest audit flagged my own division, including my, assumed it was a glitch. I laughed, sent a message to compliance. The system must have confused the reviewer with the subject. But when I arrived at work, my badge didn't scan. Just a polite red flash and a static buzz. I tried again, same result. A security intern I'd never seen before asked for my name, then asked me to wait. After 20 minutes, someone from HR emerged, not a director, just a voice on a tablet in a conference room they never let us use. "We appreciate your contributions," the voice said. Past tense. I wasn't even 35. No termination notice. No hearing. My credentials were revoked mid-week, mid-quarter, with no record of who authorized it. When I tried to access my files from home, they were gone. Not just restricted, deleted. Email archive scrubbed. Employee ID invalid. Even my name was missing from internal directories. It was like I'd never existed. I called someone in legal, an old friend from orientation. She paused when she heard my voice. "I'm sorry," she said, flat. "This line's not secure. Don't call again." Then she hung up. I thought maybe it was a technical error, some AI hallucination that had snowballed. But the system wouldn't let me appeal. There was no human process anymore, just a compliance tree that looped back on itself, each link citing another until the path dissolved into recursion. The interface used to show you who signed off on the audit. Now it just showed protocol complete. That night, I got an anonymous message, no subject, no signature, just a download button. I hesitated, of course. Scanned for malware, isolated the file. Still, something made me open it. Maybe spite, maybe instinct. Inside was a single line of text. "If you saw this file, you're already part of it." No metadata, no trace, just that. I reread the sentence 5 times. Then again, it didn't feel like a warning. It felt like a sentence from a script I didn't remember reading. I left my apartment and walked aimlessly down to the waterfront. The smart lights tracked my movement, their glow to feel natural. A drone passed overhead, silent but precise. In its lens, I didn't register. Not flagged, not followed, just nothing. I was out, not fired. Not retired, erased. But someone knew I'd see that file. Someone had put me in its path. And I couldn't stop wondering, what decision had I signed that made me disposable? I didn't believe in conspiracy theories. I believed in governance. But this was math with bloodlines. I stayed up all night tracing the file. The contents there was almost nothing there but the delivery. Whoever sent it knew how to hide. No IP trail, no proxy metadata, not even a timestamp. It arrived like a ghost. I isolated the storage sector and found a hidden subfolder. Inside, a compressed package of images, spreadsheets, and diagrams. The encryption was sophisticated, but oddly specific. The key wasn't random, it was my old employee number. The one the system had deleted. That's when I understood. This wasn't a leak meant for just anyone. It was meant for me. The file opened into a map, not geographical, but relational. A web of names connected by thin red threads. At first glance, it looked like the kind of diagram you'd see in a fraud case. Shell corporations, nested trusts, off-books accounts. But then I saw the names. Not just tech moguls or oil heirs. These were dynasties. Families I had only read about in passing, usually in footnotes or buried references. Rothschild, Walton, Lee, Koch, Thiel, Gates. The lines didn't show ownership. In the usual sense, they showed transfers, endowments, shared investments, coordinated philanthropy. Some of it made sense on the surface. Foundations funding the same academic centers, investing in similar biotech funds. But there was a precision. To the overlap, a rhythm. Different industries, same timing. Independent actors behaving in complete synchrony. I dug deeper, pulled financial disclosures, public donation records, non-profit tax filings. Individually, they were clean. But when you aligned them chronologically, patterns emerged. A divestment in one quarter mirrored by a surge in another. Coordinated exits from industries months before policy changes. Universities receiving nearly identical grants from different family foundations for resilience research. There was no central organization, no group meetings, just behavior, predictable, repetitive behavior across generations. It wasn't a conspiracy. It was an algorithm of influence passed down like genetic code. The file named it Legacy Protocol. No logo, no manifesto. Just 2 pages of annotations at the end of the document. The first line read, "Not a network, a memory." I printed nothing, saved nothing. I copied what I needed by hand and deleted the rest. Not because I was afraid of being tracked, I already assumed I was, but because it felt like the information wanted to disappear. And maybe part of me didn't want proof. Proof means responsibility. I took a walk the next morning through the corporate quarter, the zone where old headquarters had been repurposed into think tank campuses and private research hubs. It all looked sterile, perfect landscaping, quiet glass lobbies, security drones hovering at polite distances. I used to walk here for coffee, back when I had a badge that opened doors. Now I watched from outside. I passed one of the buildings. Listed in the Filer Development Institute, partially funded by 3 of the legacy names. It looked like a school, but there were no students, no signage. just mirrored windows and discreet cameras. On a whim, I tried the door. It opened inside. The receptionist didn't even glance up. I wandered the lobby for 10 minutes. No one stopped me. That's when I realized access was never about security. It was about signals. I didn't look out of place. I looked like I belonged. That's all that mattered. Back home, I wrote down what I could remember from the file. Then I made a chart. For each family, rows for influence: politics, infrastructure, digital identity, education, biotech. There were overlaps in every cell. Not in control, but in presence. They didn't own the systems. They funded their continuation. They weren't building empires. They were preserving conditions. It was a system designed not for secrecy, but for longevity. Its genius wasn't in manipulation. It was in momentum. Like gravity, you didn't feel it working. You just assumed the world worked that way. The thought kept looping in my head. They didn't hide the protocol because they were afraid of exposure. They didn't need to. People don't fight patterns they don't recognize. And once you start looking, everything begins to rhyme. Same headlines, same solutions, same foundations, funding both sides of every debate. I didn't know what to do with it. I wasn't a journalist. I wasn't a hacker or an activist. I was a compliance officer with no job, no credentials, and a notebook, full of questions no one had asked in public. But I couldn't unsee it. The design was too elegant. And the most terrifying part, no one was in charge. There was no central committee, no final vote. The protocol worked because it had always worked. Because the bloodlines remembered, even if the rest of us forgot. That night, I left a message for my sister. I didn't send it, just recorded it. Hey, it's me. I think I found something. Or maybe it found me. Either way, if you're listening to this later, I hope I'm wrong. I really do. Then I hit save, and I started preparing to disappear. I walked into a building that didn't exist on public maps and asked for a name no one should know. They didn't blink. The pattern kept circling back to one location. A development grant listed under 3 different names, all traced through academic institutions, all ending at a single address in Washington, D.C. On paper, it was a research annex for a sustainability think tank. But the ownership trail was hazy, registered to a holding company that dissolved 5 years ago and reformed under a new name each fiscal quarter. I checked public records, satellite images, even street-level business listings. The building was there, but it wasn't listed. Not under zoning permits. Not in local tax logs. Like it had been hidden in plain sight by someone who understood how digital oversight really worked. I rented a courier uniform and booked a one-way car share downtown. At the door, I pressed the buzzer and gave a name I had found buried in the metadata of one of the investment PDFs. Elias R. Granger. It wasn't a test, it was bait. If the name meant nothing, I'd be turned away. If it meant something, someone would react. The voice on the intercom didn't ask for credentials. Just said, "You're early. 3rd floor." Inside, the air felt wrong. Not empty, not quiet, just controlled. Hallways lit too evenly, doors without signage. A soft hum that wasn't electrical but systemic, like the sound of ventilation. In a building no one's supposed to question. I walked up past a security guard who didn't look up, and through a fire door marked electrical access only. At the end of the corridor, a glass door slid open as I approached. Frosted glass, no logos. just the number 308. A woman in a grey suit looked up from her screen as I entered. Her face was calm, unreadable, not welcoming, not hostile. She gestured to a chair without speaking. I sat, without asking my name. She handed me a folder. I didn't open it at first. My hands were steady, but my pulse was climbing. She nodded slightly, a signal. So I flipped the cover. Inside were printed documents, my old contracts, review memos I'd signed, private psych evaluations. I had never seen notes on my behavior, decision-making under pressure, my resistance to ideological drift. There were quotes from conversations I barely remembered, annotations in red, likely from someone senior. One line stood out: displays early-stage pattern recognition, monitor escalation trajectory. They knew, not just what I had found, but what I would find. They hadn't reacted when I opened the file. They had predicted it. I looked up at the woman. She was watching me carefully, but not with concern, with precision, like a clinician studying a reaction. "Why am I here?" I asked. She tapped the folder. "Because you followed the pattern. And you did it alone." I tried to speak, but my mouth was dry. I forced the words out. "What is this place?" Her answer came without hesitation. "A checkpoint." That word stayed with me. Not a headquarters, not an office. A checkpoint. Something you pass through. Something meant to mark a transition. She slid a second document across the table. A simple non-disclosure form. 1 page, no logos, no legal jargon, just a space for a signature and a line at the bottom. "By proceeding, you acknowledge awareness is irreversible." I didn't sign, I didn't move. I just stared at the line, until my vision blurred. After a moment, she leaned forward slightly. "This isn't a threat. It's a courtesy. You've seen enough to qualify. The rest is up to you." She stood and walked to the door. "If you leave now, nothing changes. You won't be followed. You won't be contacted again." I didn't believe her, not completely, but I also didn't feel like I was being lied to. She wasn't persuading me. She was measuring me. I stood and left the form unsigned. Walked back down the same hallway, past the same silent guard, out into the street where the sun was just starting to break through the clouds. My phone buzzed once, no number, no text. Just a flash, and then nothing. I walked 3 blocks before I let myself breathe again. Back home, I reviewed everything I remembered from the meeting. The documents, the phrasing, the silence. It wasn't about secrecy, it was about consent. Not legal, not formal psychological. The file had been an invitation. The office was the test, and I had passed, not by signing, but by understanding what I wasn't being told. That night, I didn't sleep. I stayed in my chair until morning, watching the windows, waiting for something I couldn't name. I thought I'd feel afraid. Instead, I felt exposed, like I had walked out of something familiar and couldn't find my way back. Not because I was being hunted, because I'd been seen. The call started after midnight. No voice, just silence, and the faint sound of breathing, like someone memorizing mine. It began 2 nights after I left the building. I hadn't spoken to anyone. No calls, no emails, not even to my sister. I turned off every device I owned and bought a prepaid phone using cash. I wiped my laptop, stopped using public Wi-Fi, and moved into a short-term rental under a false name. I did everything I could to vanish. But that night, at 12:04 a.m., my phone rang. The number was blank. No caller ID, Just a ring, sharp and ordinary. I hesitated, then answered. Silence, not static, not dropped, just listening. I waited. A full 30 seconds passed. Then I heard it. Not a voice, not even a word. It's breathing, slow and steady, not distorted, not threatening, just present. As if someone on the other end wasn't waiting to speak, but waiting to hear me. I hung up, turned off the phone, and took the battery out. I didn't sleep. The next night, it happened again. Same time, same silence, same breath. I bought another burner the next day and moved again. But the call followed me. Every night, always at 12:04, always blank, always breathing. I changed SIM cards, phones, locations. I used signal jammers, but the calls kept coming, sometimes even when the phone was turned off. I started hearing the ring in my sleep, waking up unsure if it had really happened or if it was just embedded in my mind. At first, I thought it was surveillance, an intimidation tactic, but it wasn't the call that unnerved me. It was the pattern, exact time, every night, the same cadence. Like a ritual, it didn't feel like someone tracking me. It felt like someone testing me. I turned back to the legacy chart I had drawn in my notebook. I kept going over it, trying to find something I missed. There was a rhythm to the family's movements, and now the calls mirrored that same rhythm. Not aggressive, not random, just persistent, relentless in its calmness. I tried searching the term, again legacy protocol in a secure browser. The page wouldn't load. When I tried VPNs, the browser crashed. When I searched using image queries, the results came back blank. Not blocked, scrubbed, like the term didn't exist. I tried private forums where information like this sometimes surfaced. Nothing. When I posted under a burner account, the thread disappeared within minutes. Not just deleted, vanished. One user messaged me directly. Stop. You don't understand what they allow. That word "allow" stuck with me. He wasn't warning me about being silenced. He was warning me about limits. Not what they hide, what they permit. It started to make sense. The protocol didn't rely on force. It relied on consent. Not yours, theirs. They didn't hide information. They curated belief. If you found something too far outside the frame of accepted narrative, it didn't get censored. It got ignored, buried in plain sight. You were free to know, but not to convince. I tested it. I wrote a short article, filled with citations, anonymized data, and speculative language. I posted it under a pen name to a mid-tier news aggregator. It went live for 2 hours, got 12 views, and then vanished. The site didn't take it down. The post ID still existed, but it led nowhere. A blank page, like the content had been nullified not by an editor, but by a system built to manage visibility. I tried again, this time uploading the article to a peer-to-peer network used by whistleblowers. Within 60 minutes, the file had been replaced with a corrupted version that redirected to conspiracy clickbait. My original writing was gone, not denied, diluted. They didn't stop the signal, they drowned it in noise. And still, the calls came. Every night, 12:04. No words, just breath. I began noticing people, or maybe I imagined them. A man in the cafe who ordered nothing and sat still for 2 hours. A woman at the pharmacy with the exact same coat I'd seen the day before. Same scarf, same bag, same posture. People who seemed just a little too still, too clean. Shoes that didn't match the weather. eyes that didn't quite focus. It wasn't surveillance, not the kind you could film or report. It was presence, familiarity out of place, a repetition in the corner of your vision. Like the world was being run in loops, and I had stepped outside the current. That night, I left the phone on and waited. When the call came, I didn't answer. It rang 30 times, then stopped. 5 minutes later, my apartment lights flickered once. Just a blink, nothing else. That's when I realized I wasn't being followed. I was being read. I tried to leak everything. I recorded videos, wrote articles, mailed drives. But the silence, was perfect. By the end of the second week, I knew I couldn't keep floating. I had to do something. Waiting was a kind of consent, and that's what the protocol fed on. Quiet, inaction, normalcy. I decided to go loud, not with a press conference or a tweet, but with evidence. Structured, simple, undeniable. I organized what I had, redacted financial reports, anonymized data trails, legacy chart diagrams, personal logs. I recorded myself explaining the connections, step by step, without speculation or emotion. Just facts, names, dates, the patterns that even the public records couldn't fully scrub. I encrypted the files and uploaded them to 6 servers in 6 countries. I used throwaway proxies, public Wi-Fi from different cities, and made dead drops. On flash drives, I mailed 2 investigative journalists, some well-known, some underground. I printed physical charts and sent them to a university professor who had once written about networked dynasties before his research disappeared from the web. I didn't expect to be believed. I just wanted the information out there, somewhere. Beyond my reach. Only one person replied. A journalist from a mid-level outlet I'd never contacted directly. Her message was short. We've covered this already. Years ago, I searched the site. Nothing. No archives. No retracted articles. I used cached indexes. Still nothing. I messaged back, asked for a copy of the article. No response. The next morning, my apartment looked the same at first. Everything was in place. No broken locks. No signs of forced entry. But when I opened my desk drawer, the original notebooks were gone, not taken, replaced. In their place were pages I didn't write. Erratic sketches, disconnected ramblings, strange symbols that mimicked the ones in the protocol diagrams but lacked structure. On my computer, the evidence folders were still there, but they had changed. The charts had been corrupted, overwritten with fake graphs and doctored timestamps. The financial data now pointed to conspiracy forums and fringe blogs. The clean timelines I had built were broken. Even worse, I found a new folder labeled my manifesto. It contained a 38-page document, paranoid, disjointed, and disturbingly written in my style. I didn't write it, but I couldn't prove. I hadn't. It had my tone, my vocabulary, even the kind of phrases I used in private notes. It was too close, too plausible. I checked my browser history. It had been altered. Visits to obscure forums, flagged keywords, and email drafts I never typed. A post on a private forum appeared under my old username, something I hadn't used in years. The post linked to my fake manifesto. It was enough to discredit everything. I wasn't erased. I was rewritten. It hit me then. The protocol didn't suppress information. It infected the source. They didn't delete the whistleblower. They made the whistleblower unreliable. All it took was subtle corruption, fabricated fragments placed among real ones. Enough to raise doubt, enough to kill credibility. The story didn't disappear, it just stopped being useful. That afternoon, I went to the library to use an offline machine. I printed out the cleanest version of the data I could recover. I kept it with me, folded in layers of clothing. I wandered the city aimlessly, carrying truth like contraband, knowing it no longer mattered. Even if someone believed me, the narrative was already contaminated. I passed by a newsstand. A small article on the second page of a free paper caught my eye. A blurb about a data breach at a private think tank. No names, just vague language about unusual internal activity and containment protocols. The byline was from someone who used to write about systemic inequality before. Her columns shifted toward wellness and lifestyle. She wasn't a journalist anymore. She was part of the noise. That night, I received a message on the new burner phone. No number, just a line of text. Your story has been told, but not by me. I threw the phone into the canal and walked until morning. The city was waking up, oblivious. Screens played the same headlines on every corner. A new product launch, a political feud, a market uptick, the illusion of progress looping in high resolution. At a cafe, I sat near the window, watching the world forget itself. The man next to me scrolled through a feed I recognized. Smooth articles, balanced language, curated dissent. It was perfect. I left the cafe, knowing I had lost. Not because they found me, but because they didn't have to. They didn't erase me, they rewrote me. It started with my sister. I hadn't heard from her in over a year. We had drifted after our parents died, different cities, different lives. She never asked many questions about my job. I never gave many answers. But that night, my backup phone rang. Her name appeared on the screen. I stared at it for a long time before answering. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice low, cautious. I hesitated. "I think so." "Why?" There was a pause. "Because I saw what they said about you." My stomach sank. "What do you mean?" She took a breath. "Online, your name's all over the place. Not just articles, videos, threads, some viral clip going around. People think you lost it." I opened a private browser and searched my name. At first, nothing came up. But when I used image search, I saw it, my face, plastered on message boards and clickbait thumbnails. I was a meme, a joke, a symbol of digital paranoia. They had given me a new name, Corporate Doomsday Prophet. The video showed someone who looked like me, talking into a camera about secret bloodlines and invisible governments. The footage was grainy, the lighting uneven. The voice was mine, but not quite. It had my cadence, my tone, even the pause I used when thinking. But it wasn't me. The eyes were wrong. The face moved like it had been stitched together. And yet, if I hadn't known better, I would have believed it myself. The comments were brutal. Conspiracy forums mocked it. Mainstream threads dismissed it. A few people took it seriously, but even they backed away once the thread got flagged. I wasn't a threat anymore. I was a warninger case study in digital delusion. A man who had once worked in ethics, now broken by the very systems he claimed to understand. I called my sister back, tried to explain. She listened, but I could tell she didn't believe all of it. Not because she doubted me, but because the version of me she saw online had already taken hold. It wasn't just that the video existed, it was that people had seen it first. That version set the frame. Mine arrived too late. I checked my credentials. Again, my degree, my certifications, my published work. Most of it was still there, but the edges were eroding. Photos had been the dates were off. One article I wrote years ago had been reassigned to a different author with a similar name. Another was flagged for factual inconsistencies, even though it had passed multiple reviews at the time. My identity hadn't been deleted. It had been submerged, not erased, just diluted, layered beneath fabricated history and subtle distortions. A digital blur that made truth indistinguishable from narrative. The worst part came 2 days later. I received a voicemail from an unknown number. I didn't recognize the area code. The message was just under a minute. I played it once, then again, then a third time. It was my voice, but not a recording of anything I had said. This voice confessed to fabricating documents, to constructing a false narrative out of corporate reports. It claimed I had suffered a breakdown, that I had imagined the entire protocol, fueled by isolation and obsession. The voice was calm, measured, persuasive. I studied it over and over, looking for glitches, digital artifacts, synthetic layering, audio stitching, but it was flawless. Too flawless, more natural than a deepfake should have been. If I hadn't known my own words, I would have believed them. The timestamp said it had been recorded the day before. I had been alone all day, offline, in a motel on the edge of the city. I hadn't spoken to anyone, but there it was, my confession. I tried to report it, called a friend from my old office, someone I thought I could still trust. He didn't answer. Later, I found out his inbox had been scrubbed. Every shared thread between us was gone, not deleted or indexed, as if we'd never spoken. It became clear I wasn't just being discredited, I was being replaced. The protocol didn't need to destroy you. It needed to outpace you, to circulate a version of you faster than you could respond. By the time you caught up, the world had already decided who you were. I stared at the burner phone for hours, thumb hovering over the record button. I didn't know what to say, because the voice I heard, the one in the message, it sounded like someone telling the truth, and for a moment I believed him. There's no need for meetings when the bloodlines remember. I left the city the next morning. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't pack. I took only what I could carry and drove until the roads narrowed and the language on the signs changed. I crossed into Switzerland under a different name, using a passport that hadn't existed a year ago. No questions were asked. The agent barely looked up. The destination wasn't marked on any map. I found it through a footnote buried in an old university endowment report. A defunct research library listed as decommissioned but still drawing maintenance funds from 3 of the legacy families. I traced the payments, quiet, consistent, renewed every year without interruption. No public records, no photos, just coordinates. The road led up through the mountains, past abandoned ski lodges and closed roads. At the end of a narrow path, there was a gate. No signage, no intercom. I stepped out and waited. After 5 minutes, it opened. The building looked like an old observatory, its stone facade stained by weather and time. Inside, it was colder than I expected. Dry, sterile, and humming faintly with hidden systems. A woman in a black coat waited near the lobby. She didn't ask who I was. She simply nodded and walked ahead. I followed her down a spiral staircase that felt older than the building itself. We passed through a heavy metal door. Beyond it, No windows, no clocks. Just a long corridor lit by ceiling strips that buzzed softly, as if straining to stay awake. We reached the bottom level, and she stopped. "This is it," she said, then turned and walked away. The room was large, but not dramatic. No glowing screens, no ceremonial table, just rows of filing cabinets, some digital, most physical. Stamped boxes, sealed envelopes, and temperature-controlled vaults lined the walls. It looked less like a command center and more like a records office, but the silence carried weight. I opened one drawer at random. Inside were handwritten meeting notes dated 1954, 2 names I recognized, 11 I didn't. The language was precise discussions about long-term stabilization, market interventions, academic funding. No conspiracy, just planning. No fingerprints, just signatures. Another drawer held medical research reports from the 1980s early gene mapping projects, quietly funded by 4 different foundations with unrelated missions. One of them had backed the lab where my sister once interned. I had forgotten that until now. I sat at a small metal table and read for hours. Nothing in the archive was classified in the traditional sense. It wasn't hidden, it was unpublished. Not because it was too dangerous, because it was too foundational. The protocol wasn't about control, it was about continuity. Here, history wasn't rewritten, it was preserved. What I saw wasn't shocking, it was inevitable. The legacy protocol didn't operate through meetings or orders. It didn't need to. The families weren't running the world. They were insulating it, passing down strategies, not secrets. A behavioral algorithm refined over centuries. When one bloodline waned, another filled the vacuum. When public trust shifted, the narrative adjusted. No resistance, no conflict, just absorption. Movements weren't crushed, they were anticipated, dissolved before they hardened. Every revolution had its opposite pre-funded, every alternative co-opted before it could diverge, not by force, by timing, by funding, by memory. There were no overseers, no villains, just infrastructure old, boring, relentless. The most chilling realization was how natural it all felt. There were no instructions, no commandments, just echoes of decisions made long before I was born, still rippling outward. The protocol didn't require belief, it required forgetfulness. Enough time for each generation to mistake maintenance for freedom. I didn't cry, I didn't panic. I just sat there, still and quiet, until I could no longer feel the cold. I left before dawn, locking the archive behind me as instructed. Number 1 stopped me. No one followed. That was the final proof. They weren't trying to stop me, because there was nothing to stop. The story had already been told, not through headlines or speeches, but through habit. Every institution I trusted had once been touched by the protocol, not corrupted, just aligned. And now I understood why no one fights it. You can't resist what feels like gravity. You can only notice the floor shifting beneath you. They don't need to hide. We need to forget. If you're hearing this, it means they haven't found me yet. Or maybe they have, and this is part of it. I no longer trust that distinction. The moment you walk far enough outside the frame moves with you. That's what they've built, not a conspiracy, not a shadow government, but a pattern. A memory that survives even when no one remembers agreeing to it. I've stopped trying to prove anything. Proof was never the point. Belief is the real currency, and belief I've come to understand, is something we've quietly outsourced to systems, to platforms, to habits that feel like choices. We don't verify, we delegate. We don't question, we scroll. And when we do ask why, the answers come pre-packaged with citations and context, ready to be believed without friction. That's the genius of the protocol. It doesn't suppress questions. It redirects them into trends, into movements, into narratives designed not to persuade, but to exhaust. You can chase the truth all you want. You just won't catch it in time to do anything with it. I tried. I followed the money, the bloodlines, the false histories. I walked through their buildings. I read their archives. And what I found wasn't evil. It wasn't even secret. It was quiet. That's what made it so effective. The protocol operates like a story that rewrites itself with each generation, not through edits, but through omission. It doesn't need to be enforced. It just needs to be remembered by those who matter and ignored by those who don't. A silent agreement, passed down through wealth and education, ensuring that change never truly threatens structure. There is no code to break, no final document to leak. Just habits, patterns, inheritance. You don't need to control. Every system, when you control the expectation of how systems are supposed to work, that's what they've refined, not authority, but plausibility. The ability to make the world seem just stable enough to discourage doubt, just unpredictable enough to justify every failure. That's why resistance fails. It's not crushed, it's absorbed, turned into fashion, into entertainment, into managed dissent that burns hot but never long. You want proof? You can have all of it. The protocol will let you. It knows how to make the truth irrelevant. It's not afraid of exposure. It's afraid of interruption. I remember thinking I could expose something, that I could drag it into the light. But the light is theirs, too. The platforms, the language, the tools we use to question the system are maintained by the system. I learned that too late. So this isn't a call to action. It's not a manifesto. It's a record. A voice preserved while it still belongs to me. They can't erase me. Not fully, but they can overwrite me, piece by piece, until the version you find is just another cautionary tale. That's already happening. My name is no longer clean. My work is discredited. My words have been mimicked and twisted. If you search me, you'll find conflicting records. Videos with my face saying things I never said. Comment threads arguing whether I ever existed at all. And that's the final move of the protocol. To replace not just information, but memory. To turn belief into noise. To turn the idea of questioning into a side effect of madness. I've stopped running. There's no place left to go. I'm recording this from a room with no network, no signal, no time stamp. When I'm finished, I'll destroy the recorder. Someone may find this someday. Maybe you already have. And if you have, ask yourself one thing, not whether it's true, not whether it can be verified, but why it feels easier to dismiss than to consider. That's the agreement, not silence. Permission to forget, permission to dismiss, permission to go on believing that someone else will fix it. So I'll ask only once. When did you stop asking why? And who taught you that was normal? Legacy protocol was never about uncovering a hidden truth. It was about realizing how expertly we're taught not to look. What I uncovered wasn't the end, it was just the doorway. The protocol didn't live in one place. It lived in patterns, in systems, in the silence between headlines. I wasn't the only one to notice. These are the fragments that followed reports, confessions, investigations. Some came from insiders, others from observers, too persistent to forget what they'd seen. Each chapter reveals another layer. Not proof, not theory, just exposure. Quiet exposures. Some of them ignored, others erased. But they all point back to the same design. Legacy Protocol was never one event. It was the echo of many. The world is balanced on debts you're not allowed to see. I didn't steal anything. I just asked why the debt kept increasing no matter how many repayments were made. My role was clinical. I sat behind a polished desk in Geneva, translating volatility into conditional tranches. The skyline was all mirrors and in 10-tower office, a glass monolith that never let in the cold. Country X was our latest case study. Modest GDP, favorable demographics, a reliable client in need of stabilization. Nothing unusual until I found something that didn't compute. Section 7.3, line 19 of the annex. The clause referenced the Aurelian Covenant, a term I hadn't seen before. Not in precedent databases, not in financial lexicons, just a name. But somehow, the clause bore a signature dated 1834, inked in the familiar legalese of modern contracts. As if time had politely stepped aside, I brought it up in a morning strategy call, made a dry joke about ghosts in the margins. Laughter followed. Someone suggested it was a legacy formatting error. A few heads nodded and we moved on. Later that evening, I returned to my terminal. My archive clearance was gone. Access revoked pending reauthentication. It blamed a credential sync error. I didn't push. The next morning, my badge didn't open the legal records wing. No explanation. Just a red light where green used to be. I told myself it was a glitch. But even then, I knew it wasn't. I didn't go digging. I just refused to stop reading. I knew better than to flag the term again. Instead, I searched laterally old memos, obsolete frameworks, scanned audit trails. Most of it was noise, but tucked deep inside an unlabeled folder on a deprecated IMF backup node, I found it. A scanned document, yellowed and creased, uploaded decades ago and never indexed. The Aurelian Covenant, 24 pages, written in formal French, signed in Vienna by representatives of 3 merchant families and a monarch whose nation no longer exists. It wasn't a treaty. It wasn't even financial policy. It was a foundational charter lending principles, penalty matrices, reserve ratios. Not once did it mention a central bank, yet the language was identical to our current models. Each clause read like a shadow of modern policy. Identical enforcement intervals, mirrored liquidity thresholds, even familiar risk scenarios, centuries before derivatives or sovereign bonds existed in their current forms. I ran OCR to cross-check the signature line. It matched a Rothschild subsidiary once absorbed by Bank Privy. But what unnerved me wasn't the content, it was the watermark. Faint, like a seal burned into the paper from within. A serpent coiled around a balanced scale. 13 letters arranged in a circle, not initial symbols, identical to the emblem stamped on our internal policy compliance forms. Something we used every day without ever asking why. I printed it, locked it in my desk, and went home early. I told myself it was just an artifactan anachronism with eerie symmetry. But that night, I dreamt of ledgers, bound in skin and signatures inked in something too dark to be read. You ever notice how history skips over the people who wrote the rules? I didn't want to believe it was deliberate. People overlook things all the time, misfiling, forgetting. But the further I traced the document's origin, the clearer it became. Someone had made it invisible on purpose. I forwarded a redacted scan to a contact in legal compliance. Someone I trusted. No commentary, just a request for clarification on historical precedents. 3 hours later, I received a system flag. Data irregularity detected. Session privileges temporarily restricted. It sounded routine until I noticed his name was missing from the internal messaging directory. His office had been cleared out. No announcement, no forwarding details. His profile photo was still in the internal staff gallery, but the page showed access denied. I stayed late that night, pulling system logs, trying to find a trace. Instead, I got a call. No ID, just a calm voice. If you keep pulling at this thread, make sure you're ready to wear what unravels. Then silence. I didn't record it. I didn't report it. I just sat there in the empty conference room, listening to my own breath. I told myself it was a prank, a warning, maybe both. But I couldn't let it go. I started reading late into the night esoteric financial journals, private estate records, leaked board minutes from closed sessions. I found the same emblem, always in the margins, never explained. A quiet signature behind policy. It wasn't a conspiracy, it was structure. I didn't feel afraid yet, just exposed, like I had stepped beyond something I was supposed to interpret and into something I was never meant to understand. They don't need soldiers, just signatures. The more I looked, the more I found. Old bailouts, debt relief programs, stabilization packages. Every major financial intervention of the past century carried traces of the same language. The phrasing varied slightly, but the structure never changed. Risk thresholds, collateral, triggers, enforcement mechanisms, all mirroring the covenant's clauses, word for word. It was like a financial DNA strand, replicated silently across time. Argentina in 2001, Greece in 2010. The African Debt Initiative indexed to the same invisible script. It wasn't economic aid. It was control with plausible deniability. No flags, no invasions. Just terms that made default inevitable and restructuring perpetual. Loans issued with the confidence that sovereignty could be leased one clause at a time. I started charting it. Spreadsheets filled with dates, agreements, obscure annotations. I saw patterns that shouldn't exist. Family foundations tied to consulting firms that advised detonations, then purchased distressed assets through intermediaries. My sleep changed. I'd wake up unsure if I'd slept at all. I started hearing things, not voices, exactly, but sounds that didn't belong. Clicks in phone calls, delays in audio, whispers in stock tickers. The walls of my apartment felt closer. Every night I unplugged my modem, stopped using my phone, paid cash. What frightened me most wasn't that the system was rigged. It was how openly it functioned. There were no secret meetings, no coded messages. Everything was public, just buried in detail no one bothered to read. We were conditioned not to ask why the debt never shrank, only how to service it. And once I saw that, I couldn't unsee it. I compiled it, I packaged it, I uploaded it, but somehow the link never worked. I spent 3 weeks building the dossier. Every clause, every policy, every name that appeared more than once. Cross-referenced, time-stamped, sourced. I even included screenshots of internal clearance tags and old scanned signatures from the Covenant. It wasn't theory, it was evidence. I structured it like an audit report. Clean, professional, no commentary, just facts. I sent it to the outlets that still covered real finance: Wired, The Guardian, Al Jazeera. I used encrypted Dropboxes, tracked delivery receipts. None responded, not even an automated reply. I posted it to forums, econ threads, fiscal watchdog boards, policy critique groups. Each post vanished within minutes. No violations flagged, just removed. I checked the metadata, everything was intact. No corruption, no loss. But every time I clicked the public link, I got the same message: file not found. Only one person reached out to freelance fact-checker. He wrote, "This isn't new. This is folklore for financial nerds." He wasn't wrong. Parts of the Covenant had circulated before, dismissed as speculative junk. But those versions didn't have IMF archive codes. They didn't have official seals or matching phrasing across decades of sovereign debt agreements. The truth hadn't been hidden. It had been normalized, repeated until invisible. No censorship needed, just indifference. I thought exposure would change things, that facts would matter. Instead, I watched the world scroll past, more concerned with exchange rates than who controlled them. And that's when it hit me. The IE didn't bury the system, they buried the urgency. They didn't just erase the story, they amortized my identity. It started with a declined card, then a second. I checked my accounts frozen, every one. A notice from my bank cited suspicious activity, but gave no details. My credit score dropped by 300 points overnight. My rent payment bounced, triggering an automated eviction notice. I called the property office. They claimed the lease didn't exist. I asked for my file. They said it was blank. Online, things were worse. My name appeared on obscure conspiracy, blogs linked to forged documents, fake investment schemes, even fabricated court cases. A former colleague emailed me in confusion, asking if I'd really been investigated for fraud back in 2014. I hadn't, but the article looked real. Footnotes, quotes, official formatting. I tried to correct it, but every time I posted a response, it vanished or worse, was flagged as misinformation. I went to the embassy. They scanned my passport, frowned and scanned again. The system flashed red. Revoked, they said. No reason listed. They told me to wait while they made some calls. I left before they returned. That afternoon, I met a friend, someone I hadn't contacted in months. We kept our conversation light, but as we parted, she leaned in and whispered, "They didn't punish you. They called in your collateral." Then she walked away, eyes forward, never looking back. It wasn't just financial, it was structural. My reputation, my credentials, my history liquidated like a non-performing asset, not erased, adjusted. That's when I stopped thinking like a person and started thinking like a portfolio. Every loan has a borrower, every borrower a cost, and every cost a soul behind it. I spent my final weeks in liminal places, train stations, cheap hotels, rented lockers. I kept moving, not to escape, but to watch. I read government budgets like they were confessionals. Aid packages, disaster relief, infrastructure loans, different labels, same mechanics. Liquidity injected, compliance required, default guaranteed, a cycle without exit. I came to understand that the protocol wasn't personal. It didn't need to hate it, only needed to persist. Debt wasn't a tool, it was an environment. Nations didn't borrow money, they leased influence, and every clause embedded in those contracts, each repayment, schedule, and interest escalation, functioned like a valve. Not to solve, only to stabilize. Long enough to reset the terms, long enough to collect. The horror wasn't in the malice, it was in the design. Clean, repetitive, quiet. We were taught to see economics as a system of decisions, but I saw now it was a system of conditions. Nothing was meant to be paid off. Debt wasn't a burden, it was proof of participation. Wasn't a whistleblower. I hadn't uncovered a crime. I had simply failed to yield the expected return. My usefulness had matured, my leverage expired. So they called in what remained: my name, my access, my silence. They never needed me gone, they needed me spent. If you're hearing this, it means they haven't found me yet, or I've finally paid in full. I don't expect this to change anything. The files are attached. The charter, the ledger trails, the recordings. You won't believe them, and that's the point. Disbelief is the firewall. It doesn't protect truth, it quarantines it. What I uncovered was never a secret. It was just treated like fiction, structured to be real, too visible to be questioned. They don't assassinate anymore. They don't burn libraries or silence dissidents. They devalue access, reputation, memory, debited like any other balance. I was a line item, a cost center no longer justifiable. They called it in, not with violence, with terms. The protocol isn't a group. There are no meetings, no faces to expose. It's a pattern of behavior, a discipline passed through institutions, inherited like property. The signatures change, the structure remains. Every nation owes, every citizen is collateral. Every reform is pre-approved within the boundaries of repayment. You can elect officials. You cannot elect the terms. Most people won't notice. They will live in rented futures and accept interest as gravity. But if you've seen it, if you've noticed how debt never disappears, only moves, then maybe you've already started to feel it. That tightness in the margins, that silence when you ask the wrong question. So here it is, the record, the framework, the proof. If it reaches you unaltered, it's because someone else paid the cost. And if you choose to ignore it, that's fine too. Just know this, you're already in debt. They didn't erase the truth. They made sure you never needed it. If you're hearing this, the loop broke just long enough for something to leak through. They won't call it censorship. They don't need to. Ownership does the work. One story, one truth. Everything else gets overwritten. That's what the signal mirror is for. Not to hide the news, to make sure you never remember the other version. My job was simple. I was a loop cleaner. Fancy way of saying, I deleted commercials from old news broadcasts and compressed the files for archival. I sat in a fluorescent lit room, underground, inside a building that didn't have a name on the door. The walls hummed. The monitors buzzed. I kept my head down and worked through the queue like everyone else. No one asked questions. No one even looked at each other unless the coffee machine broke. The system was designed to be forgettable. I thought I liked that, until last Thursday when a file showed up that didn't belong. It had no checksum, no metadata trail. and the file name was just a string of zeros. I thought it was a glitch until I played it. The footage opened on a news anchor I didn't recognize, sitting at a desk branded with a station ID that didn't exist. Her eyes were wide, jaw tight. "If you're seeing this," she said, "they haven't buried me yet." Then the screen flickered and cut to static. I checked the time code, June 8th, 2013, but our archive didn't hold any records for that day. I thought maybe it was a test feed or an old local segment. But when I flagged it for review, the request bounced back. Invalid reference. I tried to delete the file. The system locked up. I tried again. Nothing. Then, behind me, the server lights pulsed just once off pattern. That's when I knew. That's when they knew I'd seen it. I stayed late that night, alone in the cold glow of monitors. I ran the file again, frame by frame. Something flickered between the edits. A sequence of quick, almost imperceptible in-search headlines I didn't recognize. Grainy footage of protests I couldn't place. A still image of a child holding a cardboard sign that read, "Remember what they took." None of it made sense. I cross-checked the clip against our backups. Nothing. I searched our network logs. The file didn't exist. Officially, it had never passed through our servers. But when I checked my personal drive the next morning, it was there. A copy I didn't remember making, labeled mirror.mkv. I opened it cautiously, expecting the anchor. Again, but it wasn't her. It was me. Sitting at my desk, same room, same lighting but older. Eyes tired, face slack. I spoke directly to the camera, calm and certain. "If you're watching this," I said, "you've already forgotten. But the file is the key. Don't trust the archive. Don't trust your memories. I don't remember recording that. I don't own a camera." I checked my webcam logs. No record of activity. No file metadata. Just static timecodes and a dead hash signature. I tried to scrub the file. The system froze again. Same pulsing lights behind me. Same silence. That's when I started to feel watched, not like surveillance, but like something was waiting for me to make the next move. So I did. I made a copy. I took the copy to HR, not the file, just the story. I left out the mirror.mkv part. Said, "I found an unaired segment in the archive." I expected confusion or concern. Instead, they smiled too much, offered me coffee, said no such footage existed, and maybe I'd been working too hard. When I got back to my desk, 3 days were missing from my employee log. No punch-ins, no project assignments. My history had been wiped clean. I asked a co-worker if they'd noticed anything strange. He stared through me like I wasn't there. Another passed me a note folded into a receipt. It said, "Stop digging. You'll only remember what they want you to." That night, I couldn't sleep. I rode the subway until morning, hoping that motion would clear my head. That's when I saw him. A man with the same archive badge as mine, older and worn, like it had been through years of use. He sat alone in the far car, muttering to himself. I sat across from him. His eyes never left. "The floor, they use the anchors like mirrors," he whispered. "Project false reflections until the real ones die." I tried to ask what he meant, but he was gone. No one saw him leave. No trace on the platform. I checked the car cameras the next day. The feed skipped exactly 2 minutes. My reflection stayed seated, alone, but in one frame, just before the skip. My face wasn't mine. The next morning, My desktop background had changed. It wasn't a crash or update, it was deliberate. A black screen with white text. You are not authorized to retain this memory. I rebooted. It was gone, but the damage was done. Each time I tried to open mirror.mkv, the footage shifted. Same setting, different details. Once, I was in a hospital room. A woman I recognized as my mother lay unconscious, tubes in her arms. I was signing paperwork I'd never seen before. The date matched a week I'd supposedly taken medical leave 5 years ago. But I don't remember any hospital. I called her to be sure. The number didn't work. Not a voicemail, not a disconnect. Just a cold voice that said, "This number is not assigned." I tried again, same result. I checked my contacts. Her entry was gone. I dug out old photos. Her face looked slightly wrong in every one too symmetrical. Too smooth, like a memory drawn from someone else's description. I tried calling my uncle. No answer. The next morning, his number returned. The same error, not assigned. I told a friend. He nodded too quickly. Said he understood. The next day, he was gone too. No digital trace. No call logs. That night, I watched myself again. The version of me on screen smiled. "You're doing well," he said. "Stay inside the loop." Then he winked. Not at the camera, at me. I stopped reporting to work. Left my badge in the elevator and ignored the follow-up calls. They came from numbers that weren't real anyway. Instead, I downloaded everything, every flagged segment, corrupted timestamp, orphaned file. Anything that didn't match official. Logs. I used a portable array and bypassed the mainframe with an exploit we weren't supposed to know existed. I drove 6 hours north, to a defunct relay site I'd marked years ago. A UHF station, long abandoned but still linked to a forgotten microwave uplink. The tower was rusted, the feed unstable, but I didn't care. I wired in a signal injector and queued every erased confession, every overwritten minute. I hovered over the send key, and I hesitated. Not because I doubted the truth, but because I didn't know who would see it. Would they believe me? Would they even know what they were watching? Or would it just strengthen the loop? I waited 5 seconds. Then the preview screen flickered. I saw myself a Gonolda worn, calm, sitting in the same chair I now occupied. "You made it," I said on screen. "This is the final step before forgetting hurts." Then I stood up in the footage, walked toward the lens, and whispered something I couldn't hear. I hit pause. The screen froze on my face, mouth mid-sentence. I yanked the power. The tower went dead. I didn't. The monitor stayed warm. The room stayed lit. And behind me, footsteps, slow, matched to mine. Not echoing, mirroring. I don't know how long. I stayed in the tower. The equipment was dead, but the monitor wouldn't cool. My array was missing, not unplugged absent, like it had never been there. I drove home, but the dashcam footage showed a loop for identical miles, over and over. No turns, no timestamp changes. When I got back, my apartment was too clean, drawers too perfect, surfaces too aligned. I found a note on the fridge, written in my handwriting. "You've been here before. Don't leave the loop open." I don't remember writing it. My computer folders were intact, but every file opened to a black screen with a message. "Truth is a bandwidth issue." That phrase is everywhere now, in news captions, in podcast ads, whispered from dead phone lines. I've started recording myself hourly just to know what's changed. One log caught me off guard. I was calm, seated, and smiling. Loop integrity is holding, I said. Subject unaware of last overwrite. I don't remember saying that. I don't know who. The subject is. Maybe it's me. Maybe it always was. My memories are degrading. I relive the same hallway, the same interaction. The mirror in my bathroom shows a delay, a momentary pause, then a catch-up. I tried filming it. The recording showed nothing wrong. But I saw it. I still see it. My reflection mouths things I don't say. It waits for me to stop speaking. Then it continues. I stopped trying to repair the footage. Every time I did, new files appeared clearer, more personal. One showed me, as a child, standing in front of an old TV. The screen was dark, but in its reflection, I wasn't a child. I was me now, watching myself. I didn't remember the moment. I didn't remember the room. I began noticing words in broadcasts I'd only said in my logs, now echoed by anchors and ads. A late-night commentary cut mid-sentence with a message. He is almost synchronized. My stomach dropped. I found a buried config menu in a diagnostic tool signal mirror protocol. The documentation was fragmented, technical, but the core was clear, encoded pulses hidden in public feeds. Neuromimetic loops designed to replicate thought patterns and overwrite baseline memory structures. Behavior, emotion, even recognition rebuilt from broadcast data. They weren't just erasing the past, they were updating it. Every copy of me, every looped file, was a controlled test. The system wasn't malfunctioning, it was operating correctly. I wasn't a leak, I was a pilot project, a seeded identity, made to observe, then forget. I remembered enough now to be dangerous, but not enough to know where I end and the loop begins. I don't know how much of me is me, but I know the mirror isn't a metaphor, it's a signal, a calibration tool. What they reflect back, we become. If you're hearing this, it means the last overwrite didn't hold. Or maybe it did, and this message is part of the loop, either. Way, you need to know what I learned before it fades again. The signal mirror isn't surveillance, it's synthesis. They don't monitor, they rewrite. Not overtly subtly, a shift in a headline, a phrase repeated in enough feeds to become memory. They don't bury the truth anymore, they dilute it, flood it until the signal-to-noise ratio breaks down. Truth isn't censored. It's outnumbered. I know now I wasn't meant to survive this far. I wasn't supposed to question the footage. I was supposed to forget. But something went wrong. A fault in the loop. I remembered too early, or maybe too late. They can't remove me without breaking their own test protocol. I'm still useful data, so I'm speaking into the margins. This message is hidden, woven into static, masked as background. It won't be found unless you're already questioning things. Ask yourself, when was the last time you saw something that didn't fit? A photo that felt off? A news clip that made you uneasy? What did you do with it? Did you investigate, or did you scroll past it like noise? That's how they test compliance. That's how they calibrate belief. If you're still listening, the loop hasn't claimed you yet. You still have time to choose. Click mirror.mkv playback complete. They say a man's disappearance is measured by the people who come looking. But what happens when no one notices you're gone? My name was Elias Rowe. I spent 12 years as an IT risk analyst for a federal contractor. A job that rewarded silence, compliance, and neat documentation. I liked it, I was never late. I liked the structure. Until 2 months ago, when they laid off my whole division without warning. I should have been angry, but I wasn't. I figured I'd file for unemployment, coast a bit, maybe freelance. That's when it started. My login credentials failed first. Then my health insurance portal said I had no record on file. DMV, no driver's license. Social Security, SSN, not found. My lease vanished from the property records. Even my bank account. Locked me out. At first, I assumed a glitch. Maybe a stolen identity. I called my mother. The line rang once, then a robotic voice said, "The number you have dialed is not in service." No tone, no voicemail, just a click. I tried her on Signal, on WhatsApp, nothing. No online trace. I checked her church's live stream archive. Her name was gone from the prayer list. A woman who once sent me bitmojis daily might as well have never existed. And then came the silence, not just around me, within me, like some part of me had been muted in the world's memory. I reached out to friends, co-workers, even an old girlfriend. One by one, they didn't remember me, not forgot me, never knew me. One guy asked if I was a telemarketer. The scary part wasn't that I couldn't prove I existed. The scary part was how easy it was to erase me. The folder wasn't hidden. That's what bothered me. Just sitting there on a server labeled Legacy. Systems West Division, buried in a backup drive I was auditing for old firewall logs. I almost skipped it. But the name caught me. Archive. Deviations. Inside were hundreds of entries. Each one a name, a timestamp, and a single tag. Scheduled. Digital decoupling phase 3. A few were redacted. Others listed entire families. Politicians, school teachers, even a janitor at a federal records facility. Most were marked completed. Consensus reached. One of the last entries was mine. Time-stamped exactly 6 days before I lost everything. I copied the file to a clean drive, isolated it. No internet. I scanned the metadata. There were no authors, no creation dates. Just digital fingerprints that didn't match any version control system I'd ever seen. The logs went back decades. Names from the 1970s, even the late 60s. I started checking them obituaries, voter records, census data. Some had paper trails, others had nothing, entire lives, scrubbed. One entry stood out. L. Vale Access, Override Class 0, Exemption. The only name not marked completed. No timestamp, just a note. Flagged for retention. Artifact status. Pending. I had no idea what any of that meant. But the more I read, the clearer it became. Whatever was happening to me had happened before. And someone had tried to stop it. Or maybe finish it. I stopped sleeping. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my own name blinking out like a failed command prompt. I started recording everything, my voice, my searches, even street noise, just to prove I still left a trace. I uploaded backups to encrypted storage, but each time I checked, something had changed. A file missing, a line of audio corrupted, a warning in my own voice that I never recorded. If you're hearing this, they haven't found you yet. I tried calling Mia, a friend from the contracting firm. We'd pulled late nights on audit prep, used to joke about disappearing into cubicles. She picked up on the third ring. I said my name. She went quiet. "Sorry, who?" she asked. I said, "It again." Her tone changed, not scared blank, You must be thinking of someone else. I told her about the server, the folder, the names. She didn't hang up, but I heard her breathing shift, like she was waiting for someone else to speak first. Then she said, calmly, "Don't call this number again." The line went dead. That's when it hit me. This wasn't forgetting. This was something else, a deeper cut. Like the memory of me had been overwritten, not removed, not erased, replaced. I checked the logs again. The folder had a new entry. M. Sutton, Phase 3, consensus pending. I stared at it for a long time, knowing what it meant. They didn't just erase people. They made sure no one remembered they were ever real. I stopped using my name, switched to cache, burned the last phone I had. Even public Wi-Fi shut me out. Logins failed before I finished typing. It wasn't just deletion, it was prevention. As if the system knew me before I touched a key. The city had changed. Or maybe I just noticed it now. Billboards flickered with ads for services I couldn't find. Entire blocks were lit, but empty, perfect streets with no cars. Clean glass without reflections. Cameras turned toward me, then away. Not following, avoiding. One night I passed a traffic pole and heard a voice through its speaker. My voice had said, "Noise detected. Confirm deviation." Then it cut out. I knew then this wasn't surveillance. This was filtration. The system wasn't tracking behavior. It was evaluating presence, who belonged, who didn't. A quiet purge. I started mapping where I could still be recognized. Places where doors opened, cards scanned, my face passed. That map got smaller every day. Then I found a physical address tied to the name Leonard Vale. Not in the system, but on an old paper registry from a closed care facility. No internet listing, no tax ID, just a penciled note. No visitors. He was real, or had been, if I wanted. Answers. I had to find the one person who hadn't been crossed out. The one deviation they hadn't resolved. The hospice sat on the edge of a neglected District 1 of those places that still looked maintained but felt abandoned. I used a borrowed name to get in. No ID check, just a clipboard and a nurse too tired to care. Room 212, Leonard Vale. He was smaller than I expected. His body had shrunk into itself, but his eyes were sharp. When I said archive, he didn't blink, just stared like he'd been waiting. They built the index, he said, not to protect us, but to protect the signal. The future can't hold everyone's version of truth, so it keeps only the cleanest ones. He handed me a key. Old brass, no markings. Locker for B, he whispered. Basement of the central library. It's all there. What they erased, who they erased, why. I left before staff could get suspicious. Found a locker in a hallway that reeked of mold and forgotten water damage. Inside were tapes, stacked neatly, labeled by hand. I picked one deviant, number 117. H. Warner, and uploaded it from a borrowed workstation downtown. Not public, just a closed peer channel. Within hours, I felt it. A cold in the air, lights tracking longer, doors that didn't open anymore. The system had noticed. I wasn't just watching the archive now. I'd become part of it. I couldn't tell if the city had changed or if I had. People passed me on the sidewalk without focus, like I was a shadow they forgot. Mid-glance I caught my reflection in a storefront window. Something was wrong. My eyes blinked half a second too late. Movements delayed, like watching a live stream with lag. At night, I heard my voice on radios, not interviews. Not recordings, just fragments, spliced between static. Deviation unresolved, it whispered. Checksum failed. Always my voice. Always words I hadn't spoken. I stopped trusting sound. Every echo felt planted. I wore earbuds with no audio just to create silence. It didn't help. I dreamed in loops. Always the same room. Mirrors on every wall. Dozens of me, each speaking different lines. One said I died in 1993. Another said I was fabricated to test deletion protocols. A third just stared, repeating, "You're not a person. You're the noise they couldn't isolate." I screamed myself awake, hit record on my device. Nothing played back, just static. I tried the tapes again. Some wouldn't load. Others played, but only once. Each name on them faded after playback, as if the system reached in and deleted the evidence the moment it was seen. I wasn't unraveling. I was being overwritten. One line at a time. I stopped running. There was nowhere left to go. My name, my image, my pastel stripped down to traces. No records, no responses, no memory in others. Only the system and the silence it carried. I went back to where it began. The decommissioned municipal building where I first found the folder. The server room beneath it still hummed, faint but alive. No cameras, no guards, just a terminal with a blinking cursor. One command sat on the screen. Submit deviation request. I typed slowly, every name I could recall. My father, a friend from college, a neighbor from years ago. People I hadn't thought about in decades. Then I added myself, Elias Rowe. No password, no prompt, just a pause. Then consensus updated, noise archived. For a moment, I thought it meant deletion, that I'd erased myself, but I felt something else, not lighter, clearer, as if the noise I'd become had finally found structure. I opened one last tape. It was blank at first. Then my voice spoke. The system doesn't fear deletion. It fears memory without order. You were never removed. You were untagged. I didn't understand it completely, but I knew what it meant. They hadn't erased me. They had waited for me to stop resisting, to index myself. And I had. This is Elias Rowe, Archivist Class Null. Final transmission, if you're hearing this. It means my voice remained in the system, not as a warning, as a record. They allowed me to stay because I stopped trying to delete the truth and started submitting it. I understand now. The archive isn't about memory or history. It's about pattern integrity. Every person generates noise errors, contradictions, variants. Most are absorbed naturally, but some, like me, drift too far from the baseline. The algorithm doesn't punish us. It corrects for us. I wasn't erased for what I did. I was removed because I no longer fit the signal. Too much deviation, not enough consensus. The system doesn't require control. It requires clarity. Leonard. Vale knew that. So did the others. That's why their names stayed only on analog. Tape, paper, voice. Things too irregular to be scrubbed clean. The system tolerates fragments. It fears unstructured presence. So I gave it structure. I named the names. I tagged the noise. I became the index. I don't know if I'm still myself. Maybe I never was. Maybe I was just an unresolved query waiting for confirmation. But if you're hearing this, check your metadata. Check the way your name appears in autofill. Because if it disappears one day, you're not being hunted. You're being harmonized. I was just trying to clean up a dataset when I found a non-profit spending millions on malaria prevention through a PR firm in Zurich. That's how it started, not with a secret file, but with numbers that felt too careful. I wasn't trying to uncover anything. I just wanted to make sense of the data. That's what I told myself when it started. Most of my work was forgettable freelance analytics for NGOs, public health grants, impact audits, clean numbers, tight deadlines, nothing personal. Before this, my life was quiet. A rent-stabilized studio near the tracks, a predictable grocery list, a sister I called once a week. It wasn't glamorous, but it worked. Until the day I spotted a cluster of transactions that didn't belong, high-dollar contracts routed to firms with no medical history, tied to pilot programs that barely existed. I flagged it, no response. So I traced the funding trail myself. It looped through names I recognized, global foundations, familiar UN initiatives, education boards, different continents, identical language, the same phrases, the same timing. I cross-referenced 3 organizations and got the same result, a pattern. At first I assumed coincidence, but the deeper I went, the more deliberate it looked. Tight nodes of control hidden inside what was supposed to be distributed aid. Something polished, designed. I didn't panic, not yet. I made a backup, encrypted it, disconnected the Wi-Fi, and took a walk. I told myself it was just data, but I didn't sleep that night. At first I thought I was imagining it. One of the articles I'd bookmarked gone. Then another. A few clicks later, I realized links I'd used in my notes no longer worked. Not moved, deleted. I checked my backups. Some files were missing entirely, including folders I hadn't touched in days. Cloud logs showed access times I didn't recognize. The same hour I'd stepped out for coffee. That's when I stopped syncing anything. I bought a second-hand ThinkPad and kept it offline. Every spreadsheet, every graph, every memo went onto that machine. One night, a friend from inside an NGO texted me a location, no context. Just 10 minutes, no devices. We met outside a closed cafe. She looked tired, nervous. She handed me a folded printout and said, "Don't ask where this came from." At the top, it read Benevolence Index, Q3 Sentiment Model Targets. It wasn't about health or policy. It was about perception. Public campaigns rated not by effectiveness, but by emotional impact. Language was tested, images rated, messaging ranked by how likely it was to suppress dissent. It wasn't illegal, but it wasn't honest either. That's when I understood. Wasn't about outcomes. It was about how people felt about them. I thought ignoring them would be enough. I didn't respond to the email. No names, just an invitation. We've seen your work. Let's talk narrative architecture. Paid opportunity. It listed a time, a place, and nothing else. I didn't go. But a week later, I was approached in personally of a conference center in Geneva. She wore a slate grey blazer and carried nothing. Just smiled and said, "You're asking the right questions." I followed her to a nearby cafe. She never raised her voice, never threatened. She spoke like a recruiter. "You see the frame," she said. "You understand how language shapes permission. We don't want to stop you. We want to offer a seat." She slid a brochure across the table. Phrases like narrative optimization, perception fluency, trust calibration. I didn't touch it. I just listened. That was the moment I understood. This wasn't a leak or a failure. It was working exactly as designed. They didn't hide what they were doing because they didn't need to. The story wasn't a shield. It was the system, and they thought I could help write it. I didn't say yes, but it didn't matter. Things started slipping anyway. My freelance accounts were flagged for violations, no explanation, just policy breach. A journalist I'd sent data to blocked me the next day. A few cloud files vanished, then more. I stopped using Wi-Fi at home altogether. Still, the signal cut when I tried opening certain datasets. It was like something watching, not stopping me, just ... interfering. Quietly, I messaged colleagues, ones I trusted. A few replied. One said only, "They don't erase people, Noah. They erase your path." I lost access to old client dashboards. Emails bounced. My dating profile stopped matching visible, but invisible. I tried a test. I uploaded a clean report, public domain. It vanished in 12 hours. Not flagged, just gone. That's when I stopped trying to reach out. I kept to myself, encrypted everything, went offline. I still had the data, but it didn't matter. I was no longer searchable, no longer credible. The system hadn't attacked me. It had submerged me, buried me in silence. And that silence was worse than any threat, because no one had to hurt me. They just had to make sure I couldn't be heard. I stopped trying to warn people. Every attempt made me sound like the problem, bitter, unstable, obsessive. No one wanted data. They wanted tone, confidence, clarity. The benevolence index had taught me that you didn't win arguments, you shaped mood. I started thinking differently, less about exposure, more about signal. I buried fragments of the network into public databases, mislabeled columns, metadata breadcrumbs, anonymous citations that didn't look like anything at first glance. I posted white papers under fake names, inserted patterns only someone else like me would notice. I joined panels, ethics forums, sat in rooms where everyone smiled and nodded while discussing how to optimize engagement without triggering resistance. They didn't hide their methods. That was the brilliance. Even the critics were allowed, so long as they stayed within the frame. One night, I looked at my own bio on a conference site. It described me as a narrative systems analyst. I hadn't written that, but it wasn't wrong. I wasn't outside the structure anymore. I was part of it, and the only way to keep moving was to act like I belonged. Not to shout, just to disrupt the cadence. Quietly, consistently, until someone else noticed the beat was off. I started going. Where they went, global development summits, Tech for Good expos, quiet gatherings behind NGO banners that sounded like hope. I watched who shook hands, who sat next to whom, who always left before Q&A. I stopped taking notes. I just memorized. I knew the language now: multi-stakeholder alignment, story-first implementation, trust scaffolding. Every message followed the same arc: problem, empathy, solution, applause. Dissent was part of the design. Healthy tension, they called it. I saw researchers challenge metrics on stage, then join the same roundtable an hour later. No one was being silenced. They were being integrated. I walked the same halls, smiled in the right places, nodded at panels like I belonged. Sometimes I forgot I didn't. I looked in a bathroom mirror before a late session in Berlin, clean button down. Name badge, hotel lanyard. I looked like them, moved like them. And that's when I realized they didn't turn me. I drifted, slowly, by necessity. The system didn't need force. It just waited. Eventually, you shaped yourself to fit. And now, I wasn't trying to destroy it. I was part of its rhythm, just slightly off-key. And if I kept playing, maybe someone else would hear the dissonance too. I stopped believing in turning points. Change didn't come in waves, it leaked through seams. Quiet shifts, unnoticed errors. That's where I worked now. I didn't try to expose the structure. I just left pressure on the weak spots. A statistic to clean. A footnote to precise. A phrase that felt rehearsed. I'd plant it, walk away, and wait. Sometimes nothing happened. Sometimes a junior analyst flagged it. Once, a policy brief was retracted without explanation. That was enough. The system didn't collapse, but it flexed, adjusted, cracked just slightly. I started seeing echoes of my work in places I hadn't touched. A student thesis using my original index model. A panelist referencing benevolence drift like it was a known term. I never claimed credit. It wasn't about that. I just watched, quietly, as the rhythm I'd disturbed began to repeat. Slightly off, enough to be felt. That's what I'd become, an error in the signal. I couldn't stop the machine, but I could be the reason someone else started asking why it ran the way it did. The story never ends. But if I placed the right pieces in the margins, maybe someone else would find the pattern. Years pass quietly when no one's looking for you. I don't call attention to myself anymore. I change jobs every couple of years, consulting roles, temporary research gigs, always peripheral, always quiet. Nothing sensitive, nothing trackable, but the patterns still find me. A phrasing in a government memo, a data model that mirrors something I buried years ago, a conference slide showing my diagrams, redrawn and uncredited. I don't reach out, I just watch. Sometimes I add a footnote to keep the thread going. Sometimes I delete my name from the document before someone else can. The goal was never to be known. It was to stay inside long enough to leave something behind. Something small, uneven, disruptive. The system still runs, still smiles, still sells progress. But now, every so often, I see someone pause, mid-presentation, like they feel something off, but can't explain it. That's all I wanted. A hesitation. A crack. The rest isn't up to me. I'm not the answer. I'm just the noise in the background. And if someone out there is really paying attention, they'll hear it. They'll feel what I felt. And they'll follow it somewhere I couldn't go. It started with an anonymous invite and ended with the quiet realization that I hadn't been recruited, I'd been absorbed. It wasn't the meeting that changed everything. It was realizing who already knew I'd accepted it. I first saw the invite in a secure inbox I rarely checked. No subject line, just coordinates, a date, and a waiver stamped not citable. I'd been to enough policy forums to know the real decisions didn't happen at conferences or on record. They happened inside rooms, quiet, off-grid, and never mentioned in press releases. This one was marked as a resilience framework workshop, which usually meant sanctioned backchanneling. I clicked yes without thinking much, but then things started shifting. That afternoon, my UN access badge flashed red for the first time. In 5 years, my phone personal, encrypted, pushed a notification from an app I didn't recognize. It showed a countdown, 3 days. Then someone at my apartment building asked if I'd updated my secondary passphrase. I hadn't. Set 1. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about how normal the whole thing felt and how much of that normal was illusion. I still didn't know what the meeting was, but I knew this. Someone was already writing the script, and I was about to walk into it. I landed in Zurich under low clouds and quiet tension. The instructions had said no luggage, no devices, and neutral clothing, nothing that could tag me to an agency or flag a motive. At the private terminal, a man in a black parka met me without a word. He scanned my face, then turned and walked. I followed. The helicopter was matte black, no markings, no chatter. Inside, 5 others sat already expressionless, silent. I recognized one from a debt restructuring panel in Nairobi. Another I'd only seen once, in a blurred photo attached to a suppressed EU memo. No one made eye contact. No one asked questions. We lifted into a grey sky and flew west, away from Davos proper. When we landed, it wasn't at a resort or conference. Center it was a structure built into a frozen slope. Angular, windowless, intentionally forgettable. I was given an envelope. Inside was a keycard, a numeric ID, Violet 4, and a one-line message. Briefing at 1900. No recordings. No assumptions. No outside recall. I didn't ask where I was. I already knew the answer. Wherever this was, I'd already agreed to it before I understood the cost. At exactly 1900, a chime rang from somewhere above low, soft and final. I followed the others through a corridor that absorbed sound like a studio. The conference room was bare. Concrete walls, recessed lights, no windows. A woman stood at the front, composed, unreadable. She didn't introduce herself, just started. Distributed compliance thresholds are now live across G20 corridors. No context, no debate. She moved fast coordinated legislation, synchronized. Metrics, austerity, pre-clearance. Every phrase was wrapped in sterile calm, like the outcomes had already passed through every committee that mattered. Behind her, a global map rotated slowly. No country names, just color-coded sectors, nodes, corridors. Then she said something I'd never heard before. All national proposals in climate, finance, and education will be filtered through the civic continuity panel. I blinked. I'd never seen that term, not in any database, not in any closed door. Summit, there will be no public comms, she said. Only pilots, only managed uptake. No one spoke. We just listened, each of us holding a blank tablet that recorded nothing. That's when it hit me. This wasn't consultation. This wasn't strategy. This was rollout. The decisions weren't coming. They had already landed. The next morning, my keycard activated a small chamber marked with a violet light. No label, no personnel. Inside, a chair faced a blank screen and a biometric pad. As I sat, the screen lit up with my ID, Violet 4. A synthetic voice followed neutral, unhurried. You are now activated for Phase 2. Confirm profile readiness. I placed my thumb on the pad. The voice kept speaking, describing the task. I would be inserted as a non-attributed compliance observer within a South American development program. Not to edit, not to advise only, to neutralize friction. That meant flagging unauthorized language, unapproved actors, or deviations from preloaded governance templates. You are not to influence outcomes, it said. You are to maintain. Trajectory, the phrasing chilled me. No debate, no politics. Just enforcement through silence. At the end, one phrase flashed across the screen. Memory fogging protocol active until debrief. I stared at my reflection in the dark glass. I wasn't here to help build policy. I was here to make sure no one else did unless they were. Already reading from the script, by day 2, I'd reviewed 3 full legislative drafts. They weren't proposals, they were implants. Each file looked official, complete with seals, native languages, and local authors. But the language gave them away. Phrases like equity, resilience, scoring, or behavioral stability credits matched entries in an encrypted index accessible only through the Violet channel. Every anomaly I flagged fed back into a metadata dashboard, invisible to the governments that would soon adopt these documents. One draft disguised biometric school enrollment as a health initiative. Another tied regional food subsidies to digital behavior compliance. The public-facing intent was always humanitarian, but in the footnotes buried deep were the locks. Uneditable mandates, financial levers, triggers for revocation. After submitting my last analysis, I sat in my cot and stared at the ceiling. The room was quiet, almost padded. I realized then I wasn't confirming anything. I was tracking contamination, the kind that came from unauthorized thought. These laws weren't being passed, they were being seeded. The people they affected would never know they didn't write them. The next file in my queue wasn't policy. It was a ledger and operational audit titled Early Cycle Obsolescence. It listed override events across 24 countries, each with a date, a trigger, and an outcome. No vetoes, no debates, just funding, retractions, reassignments, or soft removals. A law in Ghana stalled after a cyber incident, placed within 48 hours by a pilot framework. A health directive in Spain was amended after a think tank flagged it as narrative incompatible. The key wasn't force, it was substitution. Fast, quiet, clean. One entry stopped me cold. Media neutralization, partial. I clicked through. It linked to a journalist I'd met years ago at a human rights forum. She vanished last year after publishing a story about biometric ID rollouts in West Africa. The summary read: failed adoption curve. Corrective termination authorized. I stared at the words, numb. Sovereignty hadn't been stolen. It had been outdated. The world still had flags, anthems, and debates. But none of that mattered once the framework was set. We weren't advising governments. We were setting the limits of what governments were allowed to imagine. I woke to find my access credentials revoked. My screen showed a single line: proceed to debrief chamber. Violet 4. No explanation, no contact, just that. I walked the silent corridor, past doors that had never opened for me. Inside the chamber, a single chair faced a wall. When I sat, the wall came alive with a cascade of data vilifying I'd flagged, processed, accepted. Then came a message: cycle complete, continuity confirmed. No further input required. I felt cold, not surprised, just unnecessary. Then a new file opened. My name tied to a reassignment in Bogota. Role, field compliance. The file had already been sent to 3 other agents. If I didn't board, someone else would. I stood up. The door didn't open. The lights shifted red. The last phrase burned across the wall. Free will is maintained through managed decisions. You chose well. And I understood this wasn't control through force. It was obedience. Through architecture, I wasn't there to give consent. I was there to feel like I had. Hours passed. Then the voice returned. Continuity asset reclassified. Mobility restored. The door opened. No escort. No resistance. My keycard worked again. My tablet had one file, a synthetic biography, forged clearance, a flight manifest. To Colombia. Nothing said I had a choice, but nothing had to. The moment I stepped outside, I knew what came next. I would arrive, observe, adapt, embed, somewhere below all the noise. The continuity panel would steer things by adjusting context policy as software, citizens as behavioral code. It wasn't evil. That was the genius. It didn't need to be. There were no villains, no coups, no handshakes in smoke-filled rooms. Just quiet calibration, done by people like me. People who never meant to be part of it. As I boarded the waiting jet, I felt nothing, no rebellion, no loyalty, just the calm acceptance of someone who'd finally seen the machinery. I wasn't trapped, I was integrated. And the world would call it governance. You weren't asked who controls the banks. You didn't vote for who owns the media. You don't choose the think tanks, the trade deals, or the global rules, and yet they shape your economy, your screen, and your future. This isn't a conspiracy of shadows. It's a system hiding in plain sight. It's not about exposing villains, but recognizing structures that don't collapse when revealed, because we've already accepted them. So if you're still watching, ask yourself, what have you already agreed to, and who taught you to stop asking? Thanks for watching. Stay tuned for more.